Greetings and salutations. It's a fine evening out. It's a bit cold. So doing a little bit of drawing work on the third illustration for the short story, The Carriers. It's more than likely not going to be a short story. The premise started as a short story. There was an idea that popped into my head, and so I sat down on the laptop and I busted out 4 or 5 paragraphs, and then I got distracted with something else, and the 4 or 5 paragraphs sat and sat and sat and sat until I forgot what the original notion that had inspired the paragraphs. So for a little bit, I kind of, thought for a minute, what am I going to write with these 4 or 5 paragraphs? I recycle heavily. If there's a paragraph or a sentence or a statement or a piece of backstory that doesn't fit in the story that I'm currently working on, I usually, put it aside, put it in a different folder, kind of like a scrapbook, a digital scrapbook, and set it off to the side for future reference. And I might go back at it and I might not, but it's there for future reference. For instance, I was working on a first chapter of a novella that had grown into a novella, bigger, brighter, and better than the previous rendition, and ended up becoming a book. And as I was working on the first chapter, I'm just sitting there just writing away, and this little backstory about a corrupt family that steals taxicabs, steals the fare, kills the fare, dumps the body, and then dumps the car, and then steals another cab, rinse and repeat. And it didn't seem like it was going much in line with the rest of the story. So I cut it out. And I thought for a minute, well, what am I going to do with this? And eventually, that paragraph, those 3 sentences, those few lines that had been cut out became something entirely different. And while I don't suffer the pitfalls of writer's block, never have, you never know, waste not, want not. If I find myself with a dry well of thought where I can't come up with anything to write, I can always go back to this digital scrapbook and say, I'm going to pull this out and see what we can do with it. And that's kind of what this was, and these little sentences, these pair of paragraphs. And for a while, it was one of those things where I just was obsessed with this idea of writing a short story. Maintaining a certain X number of pages, maintaining a certain size. And after a while, you just realize that a story has a life of its own. You can try to mandate a certain number of pages, and that might succeed for some writers, but each story has a life of its own. and this one took on a life of its own. I can't recall what the inspiration was for the paragraphs, but so I can't say for certain if it's along the same lines as what was originally intended, how the story turned out. But regardless, this is the process of doing the illustrations for the story. And it's post-apocalyptic, doom and gloom, the end of the world. The world is nigh. The world is doomed. It seems like it. You see it in the news. The last 2 or 3 years has been nothing but doom and gloom. So I'm not going to pretend that this story is going to be a rosy, sunshiny filled day of awesomeness. Just ruins. As you can tell in the torn shirt, his Sunday best. And he's in the process of checking out the buckets here to see which ones have holes in the bottom, because it's part of the game. Part of the game. The rules of burden that show up in the story, that was a fluke. Something that just popped into the head, coming up with a rule, because there's no automation. There's no machinery, there's no computers, there's no electronics. There's no mechanical aids. Everything that's done is by brute strength. And if it can't be done with brute strength, it doesn't get done. And there's not much in Line of Ruins. These fellows, they live in the catacombs in the compound, an underground complex that is part crudely dug out tunnels and part ruins. Water is revered in such a way that no one bathes. So everyone is covered in filth. the as with every piece of dystopian fiction, there is an underlying authority that commands people to do certain things that they should do and to make sure that they don't do the things that they are not supposed to do. For the most part, this is easy for the authorities at hand because the general population here has no idea about quite a few things that would otherwise be mandated against, certain pieces of information, certain knowledge, and whatnot. But there's so little of that, so little of the previous world that exists in this, that it's pretty well a simple task to mandate against forbidden knowledge. Numbers are mysterious lines and squiggles in the dirt. Things like animals, they're relatively unknown. Apart from a certain group of laborers that spend time above ground, most of the population spends most of its time underground. There's some remnant of the Morlocks from H.G. Wells's The Time Machine. It's not intentional. It's an experiment to see what kind of story could be written where the population has so little information of the past, of any kind of information, such a rudimentary ignorance that the only thing they have is basic survival, where they've been turned into essentially organs. The rules of burden are recited through verbal cues because most of the fellows here don't know how to read. The other aspect in this story is going to be the absence of at the onset. The story is going to have few mentions of female protagonists. That comes up toward the end of the story, at the conclusion. And some explanation as to how this comes about. Possibly controversial. Not that I'm worried about that. Not that I'm out to inspire controversy for any self-serving means. It's just that's how the story works itself out. Anyway, more to come on the explanation or the preamble to the story. Within the next few days, I'm going to start recording audio of the actual story to finalize first, second, third illustration here and get 2 or 3 more penciled out. I expect to be about 20 illustrations. And then there are 3, 4, I think there are 4 more short stories to work on this way of doing, the draft, and then the illustrations, and then the recording, and then on to the next project. So anyway, thank you for watching.